The John Wick franchise really was one of the best things to happen to action movies in decades, reinvigorating a genre that had become kind of tired and played out with its inventive and technically impressive single-take combat scenes, and proving that Keanu Reeves was still a viable action star even well into his 50s. But with Keanu bowing out after John Wick 4, for now at least, the race was on to expand the scope of the franchise and find new ways to make money before people forgot about it. The Continental didn't exactly set the world on fire, but here we are with another attempt in the shape of Ballerina, or to give it its full title, From the World of John Wick, Ballerina. Yeah, they really want you to know that this is a John Wick movie, arguably because they know it couldn't stand on its own merits. Kind of like Furiosa now that I think about it. Anyway, the movie stars Ana de Armas as Eve, a young woman who gets inducted into the Rosca Roma clan after her father's murder at the hands of the Cult, a highly dangerous clan who play by no rules except their own. Anyway, she eventually graduates as a ballerina and goes on a bunch of successful missions, but she never forgets the people who murdered her dads. Luckily for her, the Cult decide to come after her instead so that the rest of the plot can happen, which leads her to the Continental, where a former Cult member just so happens to be staying with a little girl that he rescued. Holy shit, that was lucky, wasn't it? Anyway, Eve hooks up with him, but then the Cult attacks them inside the Continental, which I'm pretty sure is a massive breach of the rules that would get the entire organisation permanently expelled, but whatever. Naturally, Eve is in the mood for some payback, so she goes to Frank the weapons dealer to buy some guns, and he helpfully tells her exactly where the Cult operates from. Wow, this whole investigation thing is super easy, isn't it? Barely an inconvenience, you might say. Eve just kind of walks right into the exact information she needs at the exact time that she needs it. So anyway, she heads to the Cult's base in Austria to murder everyone, which invites a full-scale war between the Cult and the Rosca Roma. I mean, after that shit they pulled at the Continental, I'm pretty sure all the clans should be at war with them by this point, but who cares? The Rosca Roma want to avoid a conflict, so they deploy John motherfucking Wick himself to take Eve out. But can she fight her way through an entire town to take out the Cult leader before John Wick stops her? And will it result in a full-scale war between the different factions? I said before that Ballerina has echoes of Furiosa in the way that it tries to exploit the success of its predecessors because it doesn't have the confidence to stand on its own, but I think the comparisons go even deeper than that. The two movies are stuck in a similar no-win situation, being decent enough action flicks in their own right, but ultimately falling short of their parent movies and destined to be overshadowed by the very franchise they're trying to build themselves on. What I'm really trying to say with all this shite is that Ballerina isn't a bad action movie by any stretch, it just has the rotten luck of having to follow some of the best action films of the past 20 years. The fight scenes are decent, even if they go on a bit too long and get to be a bit samey at times. The plot is simple and serviceable, even if it takes too long to get going and relies a bit too much on convenience to keep moving. On the plus side though, it avoids most of the convoluted nonsense that bogged down John Wick 3 and 4 and keep things much more streamlined. Eve herself is a sympathetic protagonist with an understandable motivation, but a bit light on personality and without the mystique and dark menace of Wick himself. Ana de Armas was an interesting choice. She feels like she's been a star in waiting for the past decade or so, attractive and talented but never quite able to land that killer role to elevate her to leading lady status. And having seen what she can do in Ballerina, I'm not entirely convinced there's a glittering career in action movies waiting for her. She's kind of off balance and a bit slow to hit her marks during the fight scenes. It's obvious when the stuntmen are having to hold back and waste time while they wait for her to get ready, and she doesn't look particularly comfortable with the guns either. Keanu Reeves trained with the kind of dedication that would put Navy SEALs to shame, and it showed with every fight scene that he did. Every gun felt more like an extension of his own body than some foreign object he was carrying around. De Armas, on the other hand, looks exactly like what she is, an actress pretending to be an assassin, trying her best to remember the pre-scripted fight choreography, and having to rely heavily on stunt doubles to do most of the heavy lifting. She doesn't really have the brooding intensity and intimidation factor that a role like this demands, and I feel like if this movie had been made 10 years ago, Charlize Theron would have been a more natural choice. Also, the movie supposedly makes a big deal out of the fact that she's at a disadvantage in most fights against bigger and stronger enemies, so she has to find smarter and dirtier ways to win. Fighting like a girl, to quote the movie itself. It's a nice idea in theory, but it never really carries through to the rest of the movie. Eve just goes through the same kind of run, gun and stab routine as John Wick himself, with no real concession to being smaller and weaker. Also, despite being shot, stabbed and thrown through about a dozen tables and windows, and having multiple grenades going off right next to her head, she somehow walks away with barely a scratch on her. Yeah, you're not really selling me on the scrappy, determined fighter battling through against all odds here. In the writing business, this is what we call lampshading, calling out an inconsistency in your own script without actually addressing it, as if just waving it off with a single line of dialogue is a substitute for actually fixing the problem. Well, it's not. Ultimately, the best way I can sum up Ballerina is that it's John Wick Lite. Not quite as visceral, not quite as compelling or unique, and not quite as cool and inventive as the films that it's trying so hard to follow. It's not a terrible movie by any stretch, and there's enough gunplay and mayhem to keep you entertained on a surface level, but if the studio were expecting Eve to take over the mantle of this series, I think they might be in for a disappointment. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.